In 1997, a young woman walked into a spy gadget store and vanished without a trace. What seemed like a simple shopping trip quickly turned into one of the most chilling murder mysteries in Las Vegas history. Behind the smiling face of a respectable shop owner hid a dark secret, a web of lies, obsession, and cold-blooded murder. This is the haunting story of Ginger Rios, whose disappearance would uncover the terrifying truth about a man living under a stolen name and the victims he left buried in the desert. It all began on a bright spring day in Las Vegas, April 4th, 1997. A day that started like any other, but would end in a mystery that haunted an entire community. Ginger Rios, a 20-year-old woman full of life, talent, and dreams, left her home with her husband, Mark Hollinger, to run a few errands. The two had been married for less than a year. Despite the age difference, Ginger being 20 and Mark 34, their families had accepted the relationship, believing that Ginger was happy and building a future with him. She had big dreams, performing on stage, singing, dancing, maybe even becoming Miss Las Vegas one day. They were working toward buying their first home together, and to help improve their finances, Ginger was researching credit-building techniques. That's how she came to know about a small store called Spycraft, a shop that sold spy gadgets, security equipment, and books about privacy and self-protection. It sounded harmless enough, but what was hidden behind those doors would change everything. That afternoon, Ginger and Mark drove to the Spycraft store located at 3507 Maryland Parkway. Ginger told Mark she just wanted to pick up a book on credit improvement. She entered the store alone while Mark waited outside in the car. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Mark expected her to return quickly, but she didn't. Eventually, he grew concerned and went inside to check on her. The store was quiet, run by a couple named John and Cheryl Flowers. When Mark asked about his wife, John casually replied that Ginger had already bought the book and left. But something felt wrong. Mark looked around. No sign of her, no sound, no movement, except for John standing calmly behind the counter. When Mark pressed further, John's tone grew colder. He insisted she'd walked out the front door. Mark rushed back to his car, hoping to see Ginger outside, but she wasn't there. Her purse was still in the vehicle, along with her keys and wallet. Panic began to rise in his chest. Ginger never went anywhere without her bag. Within hours, Mark called Ginger's father, George Rios, to report that something was terribly wrong. George joined the search immediately, but the trail had already gone cold. By nightfall, there was no sign of Ginger. No one had seen her leave the store, no security footage, no witnesses. It was as if she had simply disappeared into thin air. The police got involved quickly, but as with many disappearance cases, suspicion first fell on the person closest to the victim, her husband. Mark's story seemed unusual. His wife goes into a store, never comes out, and yet he waits before calling police. To make matters worse, just days later, Mark's car caught fire under suspicious circumstances while he was driving in the desert. To investigators, it looked like an attempt to destroy evidence. Mark, however, insisted it was a mechanical accident. The car had overheated. He said he barely escaped and couldn't call 911 because cell phones were rare in 1997. Police had doubts, but no solid proof of foul play from Mark's side. As the days turned into weeks, Ginger's disappearance dominated local headlines. Flyers with her smiling face were plastered across Las Vegas. Friends and family described her as someone full of joy, the kind of person who could light up any room she walked into. The idea that she had just vanished was impossible to comprehend. Investigators soon began to focus on the Spycraft store itself. Something about John and Cheryl Flowers' story didn't sit right. When police visited the shop, they immediately noticed a strong smell of bleach coming from the back room. There was also a suspicious reddish stain in the bathroom. When questioned, John claimed it was from a dog accident. Due to the limitations of 1990s forensic technology, the police couldn't confirm if it was blood. The lack of concrete evidence stalled the investigation. John and Cheryl continued running the store as if nothing had happened. John kept repeating that Ginger had purchased a book and left. Yet he couldn't provide a receipt, and the supposed transaction was missing from his sales records. Even more suspiciously, he refused to share the surveillance footage from that day, saying the cameras weren't recording. Months went by. Leads dried up. The police began to lose momentum, and Ginger's family was left in despair. Mark was cleared after extensive questioning, but he remained emotionally shattered. Every night, he replayed the events of that day in his mind, wondering what he could have done differently. But then, just when hope seemed lost, a shocking breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Cheryl Flowers, John's wife and business partner, reached out to the authorities. Her voice trembled as she spoke, confessing she had been living in fear. She revealed that her husband, John Flowers, wasn't who he claimed to be, and that she had seen something no one should ever have to see. Cheryl described how on the day of Ginger's disappearance, John had become unusually controlling and secretive. He asked her to fetch something from the back of the store. When she opened the storage room door, her heart froze. Ginger was there, motionless, lifeless. Before she could scream, John appeared and threatened her. He told her that if she ever spoke a word, he would kill her and their baby. For months, Cheryl lived in silence, tormented by guilt and fear. But after separating from John, she finally gathered the courage to come forward. Her statement reignited the investigation and sent detectives racing back to the spycraft store with a new search warrant. Inside, forensic teams discovered traces of Ginger's DNA in the back room, proof that she had never left the store alive. The puzzle pieces were finally coming together. The man calling himself John Flowers was now the prime suspect in Ginger Rios's murder. When police dug deeper, they uncovered another shocking twist. John Flowers wasn't his real name. His true identity was Craig Leslie Jacobson, a wanted fugitive with a long criminal record. He had previously been arrested for burglary and theft, but had escaped custody, assumed a new identity, and started a new life in Las Vegas. Craig Jacobson wasn't just a con man, he was a predator. He had a disturbing pattern of targeting young women, often with dark hair like Ginger's. Witnesses later said he would even pay people to take photos of women who matched her appearance. It was clear now, Ginger had unknowingly walked into a trap. A store that promised information and gadgets for safety was actually the lair of a murderer. The hunt for Craig Jacobson began across multiple states. Detectives traced his movements to Los Angeles, where he was finally captured in August 1997. After his arrest, he initially denied everything, but faced with mounting evidence, Cheryl's testimony, forensic proof, and his criminal past, he broke down and confessed to the murder of Ginger Rios. He claimed he suffered from schizophrenia and didn't know what he was doing. But psychologists who examined him said he was faking mental illness, trying to manipulate the system. Eventually, he took a plea deal, life in prison without parole for 20 years, along with $3,200 in restitution to Ginger's family. For the Rios family, the truth brought both heartbreak and closure. They finally knew what had happened, but it was a nightmare they would never escape. Ginger's dreams of dancing, singing, and performing were stolen in a moment of madness.
The arrest of Craig Leslie Jacobson, known for years under the false name John Flowers, seemed to close one of Las Vegas's darkest chapters. But as investigators dug deeper, they soon realized the Spycraft murder was only the beginning. Hidden beneath layers of deceit and desert sand lay even more terrifying secrets, proof that Ginger Rios was not his only victim. After Craig's confession, his ex-wife Cheryl Flowers led detectives to a remote stretch of desert in Arizona, just across the Nevada border. There, buried in a cedar box under concrete, lay the remains of Ginger Rios, finally ending the months-long mystery that had tormented her family. The discovery confirmed what everyone feared. Ginger had never made it out of that store alive. For the Rios family, it was a heartbreaking moment of truth. Her parents, George and Denise Rios, and her sister Daniela, had prayed for a miracle. Instead, they were left with unimaginable grief. Denise, Ginger's mother, once said she could feel her daughter's presence, that she knew Ginger was somewhere trying to reach them. Now, that hope was replaced with silence and sorrow. But even as the Rios family prepared for justice, police found something else near Ginger's grave: the skeletal remains of another young girl. The second body belonged to Cristina Martinez, a 15-year-old girl who had vanished just weeks after Ginger's disappearance in May 1997. Cristina had last been seen near a laundromat across from the same spy-craft store. At first, police had assumed she was a runaway because of her troubled background. No one had connected her case to Ginger's. Now, with both bodies buried in the same location, there was no doubt. Craig Jacobson had been hunting his victims. Investigators believed Craig used his store as bait, luring women in with curiosity and charm. He projected the image of a professional businessman surrounded by spy gadgets and high-tech gear, but behind the counter was a dangerous predator obsessed with control. He had perfected the art of hiding in plain sight, a fugitive posing as a store owner, married, calm, polite, even friendly. Those who knew him described a man with two faces: in public, polite and composed; in private, manipulative and cruel. Cheryl told investigators he often spoke about women in disturbing ways. He had a type, and he would fixate on them. Ginger, with her dark hair and kind demeanor, matched that type exactly. In the months before his arrest, Craig had grown more paranoid and unstable. He knew the walls were closing in. His lies were starting to crack, and his marriage to Cheryl was collapsing under the weight of his secrets. Cheryl's decision to finally come forward saved not only her life, but possibly many others. Without her courage, Ginger and Cristina might still have been listed as missing, and Craig might have walked free. During the trial, Craig's defense tried to claim mental illness, insisting he suffered from schizophrenia and had lost control of his actions. However, experts who evaluated him testified that he was faking his symptoms, deliberately acting unstable to avoid the death penalty. It was a calculated performance, one last manipulation from a man who had spent his life lying. In the end, he accepted a plea deal: life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 20 years and a small restitution payment to Ginger's family. Though the sentence spared him execution, it ensured he would spend the prime of his life behind bars. For the families of both Ginger and Cristina, justice was bittersweet. Their daughters' lives were gone, and the man responsible still breathed. But Craig's crimes didn't end there. Investigators linked him to at least one more possible victim, Mary Stoddard, who vanished in May 1997, around the same time as Cristina. Mary's body was never found, but several witnesses placed her near the spycraft store shortly before she disappeared. Detectives now suspect that Craig was responsible for multiple murders, his desert burial site stretching farther than anyone initially imagined. In 2015, nearly 20 years after Ginger's murder, Craig Jacobson was extradited to Arizona to stand trial for Cristina Martinez's death. But once again, he tried to manipulate the system. He claimed he was mentally incompetent to face trial. In 2016, a judge temporarily ruled him unfit, only for another court to reverse that decision a year later after discovering he was still pretending. The case was repeatedly delayed, and as of 2017, Craig remained in custody awaiting further evaluation. No new updates have been released since. Even behind bars, Craig continued to haunt his victims' families. Ginger's father George received letters from Craig, who claimed he was sorry but insisted that Ginger had provoked him by snapping at him inside the store, a cruel and manipulative excuse for a brutal murder. It showed that even in prison, Craig refused to take full responsibility. Ginger's husband, Mark Hollinger, who had once been under suspicion himself, never fully recovered. Friends say he carried the weight of guilt and grief for the rest of his life. The love of his life had vanished before his eyes, and though he was innocent, he would always question whether he could have saved her. Ginger's mother, Denise, passed away from cancer in 2014 after years of living with the pain of her daughter's loss. Family members said she found peace in believing that Ginger was waiting for her, that somewhere, somehow, mother and daughter would be reunited. Even decades later, the case of Ginger Rios continues to echo through true crime circles. It stands as a reminder of how evil can hide behind ordinary faces, and how one small decision, like walking into a store, can change everything. The Spycraft store, once filled with gadgets and lies, has long since closed, but the memory of what happened there lingers, a symbol of deception, danger, and the price of misplaced trust. To this day, the story of Ginger Rios remains one of Las Vegas's most haunting murder mysteries. It isn't just about the crime itself. It's about the fragile line between safety and danger, about how darkness can live in plain sight, and how one woman's courage to speak out, like Cheryl's, can finally bring truth to light. In the end, Ginger's legacy isn't just one of tragedy, it's also a testament to the persistence of love and justice. Her family refused to give up. Her story continues to warn others and remind us that sometimes monsters don't hide in the shadows. They stand right in front of us, smiling.
If you're still here watching, thank you. Before you go, please subscribe to our channel, Dark Frame Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another real-life mystery like this.